and some new faces, which is also important to our group. We're trying to keep ourselves alive. We've been in existence since at least 1959, and we may be the oldest chapter of the Archaeological Society of Ohio still in existence. So, with that in mind, as you can see from the first slide here, we're going to be talking about the Liberty Earthworks, and it is a Hopewell Tripartite Earthen complex. And by that, we're talking, it's going to have 3 parts, and usually these have at least a circle or a square, and then a smaller circle. All right, you might want to get the right one. All right, so a little bit about me. I have 10 years of undergraduate and graduate level coursework in Near Eastern, Aegean, and Mediterranean history and archaeology. So that's my real field. I was a Latin teacher for 31 years. I am not a professional archaeologist, but I do have some archaeological field experience. I worked on a late 18th century historical site in Jefferson County, Kentucky, near Louisville, and I also worked on a site over in Athens County, Ohio. I have also, in the last 10 years, been getting a lot of experience dealing with prehistoric sites in Ross, Licking, and Fairfield counties in Ohio. And a lot of that's been with Joe Gingrich from OU, who's a Paleo-Indian archaeologist. I shifted my interests to Ross County's prehistory in 1977, and I began systematic surface collecting of local fields on various farms around here. And I've been a member of the Mound City chapter of the Archaeological Society for at least 40 years. I've lost count. And in those years that I've been here in Ross County, even though I'm not an archaeologist, the archaeologists and the archaeological community has just been great about including local people in what they're trying to accomplish here. And I've met and interacted with all of these people and many others, but if you know anything about Hopewell archaeology, this is the creme de la creme of people associated with Hopewell archaeology. Mark Leinott, Bill Dancy, Nomi Grieber, the dame of Hopewell archaeology, Deanne Weimer, Paul Pacheco, Jared Burks, who is magnetometry master, Mark Seaman, who I believe was one of Brett's mentors at Kent State, Martha Otto, Bill Pickard, Brett himself, and his cohort, Tim Everhart. From 1977 to 2011, I was able to visit all of the local Hopewell archaeological excavations that were going on here. And I went to all of the follow-up reports that were given during the Robert L. Harness Summer Lecture Series here. And in 1993 and 2016, I was able to visit the Chillicothe Conference on Hopewell Archaeology, which was a big deal. And at the same time, I've collected and recorded artifacts that I found in field sites from some 65 different local farmsteads between the years 1978 and 2010. And every one of those is numbered with maps and everything to show what these artifacts are associated with. I've encouraged archaeologists to come to my house, and I've shared information with them and with the field school students that they brought with them to do the digs. In fact, just about a week ago, Brett had 4 archaeologists in my basement, and we were going through things there. I facilitated several student and professional research projects, and the one I'm the most proud of is the COAS, or the Central Ohio Archaeological Digitization Survey. And that was a group of archaeologists who came to my basement and said, we'd like to record your artifacts, anything that's associated with the Scioto River Valley. And they were photographing both sides of every artifact that was associated with sites here in Ross County. And after photographing them, they typed what kind of flint they were, tried to type what kind of points they were, and then every 10th item or artifact they did a 3D scan on. And so all of this is available online. If you're in Russia, Germany, China, whatever, and you want to learn about what went on in Ross County, you can access photographs, and if you have a 3D printer, you can even print out some of these artifacts. I've also spent a lot of time working with Jamie Bliven, the curator at the Ross County Historical Society, and we put together the display that's currently there now. And from 1984 to 2010, I'm zooming in on what this is all about, I have collected on the harness farm where the Liberty Earthworks were constructed. And during those 25 years, I became boots on the ground, familiar with the terrain, the geological history, and the prehistoric use of the landscape of the harness farm. And I've been studying the harness collection, which I've had since 2007, and all the field sites where the artifacts in that collection were found for the past 18 years. So I think I'm pretty familiar with this, and I hope I can show you why that's important. So let's talk about where the Liberty Earthworks are located. This landscape where the earthworks were constructed sits along the southernmost edge of the Wisconsin Glacier, which I was mentioning a while ago. At the top, it was a rolling prairie grassland, and then there were terraced valleys along Paint Creek and the Scioto River, and several forested sandstone ridges. And this area has definitely been attracting people since the Paleo period some 14,000 years ago. In fact, on the harness farm itself, at least 6 different Paleo tools were found over the years. The landscape itself began to be modified with man-made earthen structures sometime around 3,000 years ago. And between the years 600 and, between 600 and 1,000 early woodland mounds were constructed in present-day Ross County by the Adena people between the years 600 and BC and 100 AD. Now think of this, and why this is really important to me, and I think I can convince you as to why this is important as well. We're really proud of the World Heritage status that our Hopewell earthen complexes have now been recognized for. But here we are trying to picture that landscape, but realize these early woodland mounds that were here would have been here when the Hopewell constructed those earthworks. So not only do we have some 25 or so geometric earthworks and the associated Hopewell mounds, there were at least 600 and maybe as many as 1,000 Adena period mounds interspersed in amongst all of these earthworks. And it's just hard to imagine what that landscape really would have been like. Today, you cruise around Ross County and you would be lucky to find 15 or 20 mounds that are still standing that you might even recognize. Imagine between 600 and 1,000 of them. And these things, some of them were humongous, as you'll see. They were conical in shape, and they ranged from low-lying 30-inch tall mounds to as much as 35 feet high. And if you're familiar with the Story Mound here in town, it was 27 feet tall when it was excavated in 1896. Today it only stands 19 feet tall, so when you go by there and you look at that, it's missing 7 feet and all of that extra slope that probably went all the way out into Delano Avenue. So quite a different landscape than we have. And sometimes these Adena mounds were associated with low-lying earthen circles. So the Hopewell are not necessarily the first people to construct geometric shapes. All right, so we've got at least 600 Adena mounds on this landscape, and the landscape was further modified by the Hopewell peoples, who created mounds and geometric earthen structures of varying size and complexity between the years AD 100 and 400 AD. So if you think back, what was those dates for the Adena culture people? There's actually a 100-year overlap between these two people. So we had Adena and Hopewell coexisting, or at least having contact with each other for about 100 years. This is a page 71 out of William Mills's Archaeological Atlas of Ohio. This was done in 1914, and every one of those red triangles was a mound that they knew of when they created this map in 1914. I counted as many as I could, but I couldn't mark X's or lines through them because I wanted to save the map. But I counted 330 and I gave up. So there were at least 330 of them still standing in 1914. And it's been a steady decline of those ever since then. for purposes that to actually show you the accuracy of this, that's where the story mound is in the green circle there. I was actually able to pick that out. And down in the bottom right-hand corner is where the Liberty Earthworks were located. And it's actually on this map as well. Now we have a little bit of a conundrum here. This is plate number 20, page 56 from Squire and Davis's Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi, and it shows the Liberty Earthworks. The problem is, it was oriented the wrong direction. It actually should be a quarter turn, to give you an idea. So north is up this way instead of over this way with the square going that way. So where is this Liberty Earthworks complex? It's in Liberty Township, which is where it got its name, although some people call it the Harness Earthworks as well. And that's in the southeastern corner of Ross County. And I've got the earthworks on there in green, and I've circled that for you with a red dotted line. What's special about it, though, it's situated on a privately owned farm, the 1,700-acre Harness family farm, which has been in that family since the late 1700s. So it's a very special place. I think originally the Harness brothers, when they came here, may have had as many as 3,000 acres. And they came from Virginia, and through marriage of children, parts of the farm were given away as part of dowries for daughters and things like this. And it's diminished, but it's still right at 1,700 acres. And what is special about that is I've left the outline of the farm. See the green broken line there? That's a 5.2-mile long terrace that was left there by the Wisconsin Glacier. And it's bounded by the Scioto River running here, and by Walnut Creek running through here, and there's a dry run creek a little bit further to the north there. So a really nice environment for people to come in and use and exploit. And the Liberty Earthworks is one of some 24 or 25, depending on what you want to count, earthwork complexes that were constructed by the Hopewell people within the boundaries of modern-day Ross County. And in the bottom right corner, you can see the Liberty Earthworks out of all of these. And that's Mound City up there where we're at tonight. Not only is it part of this group of 25 earthing complexes here in the county, it is really special because it's one of 5 tripartite earthworks in Ross County. And I've got them up there. Before I throw the names up there, see how many you recognize. So Liberty's in the middle, since that's the topic. Sipe, which is towards Bainbridge. Works East is basically in the farthest edge, eastern edge of Main Street in Chillicothe, over there where the McDonald's is at. And Baum is over towards Bainbridge, and Frankfurt is in Frankfurt. But if you notice, they all have 3 parts to them, although this one's kind of blended up here at Baum, but they're not all in the same organizational patterns. The 3 closest to each other are Works East, Liberty, and Sipe. You can see they all have a large circle, a smaller circle, a square, and some kind of a little bump. This one looks like an upside down smiley face. And at Sipe, instead of having this circular protrusion, it just kind of bulges out there. But they still have lots of similarities. So this is the famous book. If you don't have a copy and you really like archaeology, you should have a copy of Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi by Squire and Davis, published in 1848 as the first publication of the Smithsonian Institute. And this is plate 2 in that book, which shows you 2/3 of where the Hopewell complexes are. It doesn't have the Paint Valley over here on the southwest, but it's got Chillicothe itself the way it would have been in 1848. And you can recognize some of them. And up here, for reference, that's Mound City as well. But in the lower right-hand corners, it shows works east, and then the Liberty Earthworks down at the bottom, and we're going to compare those two first. So, Liberty Earthworks is along the east side of the Scioto River, some 8 miles southeast of Chillicothe. And works east is on the west side, or the opposite side of the Scioto, just to the northwest. They're very similar in size and configuration, except for the angle. Notice I've got the angles in purple up there of the squares in relation to those little circlets, or whatever you want to call those little bumps in dotted red. Feel free to stop me if I'm confusing you in any way. Squire and Davis noted back in 1846 when they surveyed it that the eastern wall of the square had already been destroyed by the time that they did their survey. So it had washed away through some Scioto flood event, or several events possibly. It took me 3.5 hours to create this slide.
Good job.
So I managed to put Route 23 and 50 through the middle. This is where it actually is located today, except it's not there. It's been bulldozed away and whatever. But Route 23 and Route 50 run right through the middle of the large circle, and it clips the square, and it avoids the circlet, and then the small circles over here in somebody's backyards in the east end of town. And it basically, for orientation, up there where Main Street is in the upper part of the slide, you can see the Pilot Station, McDonald's, and Speedway. So when you're going out East Main, you are at the northernmost reaches of this complex. And that shows you how big it is, because it goes all the way down to Wetzel Drive, which is here, and it keeps going, except it's not as well developed in there. You've got the Union Spring factory there, and some farm fields, etc. So today, there's no trace of Works East that's visible to the naked eye because of all of this construction. Now, if we compare Liberty and Sipe, you can see that Sipe is kind of flopped down compared to the way Liberty set up. So I don't know what their purpose is, but Brett and Mike and I have been working a lot in the last couple of months dealing with alignments in these earthworks, and possibly if we can get deeper into the alignments of these various walls and the gates in them, we might find out why they flip-flopped where the square and the circle were and why they spread it that way. But it's got to be something like that. And as it says there, Sipe is similar to our Liberty is similar to our World Heritage Sipe works, and it's 18 miles almost due west of Liberty, and it's on the west bank of Pink Creek. They're both similar in size. The size of the squares and the circles are virtually identical, but they're oriented. And it has a bulgette instead of circlet. But both of them had great mounds constructed within the large circle, and Sipe even had 2 great mounds. If you go to Sipe today, you'll see this weedy patch over there to the northeast of the entrance to the site there, and that's a large mound that was excavated by Mills around, 1908 or so, somewhere in there. About the same time he was working at Harness. Unlike Sipe, the Liberty Works has not been geophysically surveyed. And that's sad, because there's so much information that can be gained from a geophysical survey. Therefore, we do not know about any possible subterranean features. There could have been wood hedges, special ditches, some kind of sites, maybe even house sites, although so far we're not finding any evidence of house sites within these major earthworks themselves, and definitely some workshop sites. And those are all over the place out at site, but we don't know about what Harness is really like. However, the lithic distribution across the Harness landscape is much better documented than at site or at any other Hopewell Earthen complex anywhere. It is a treasure. There's nothing like this. It's like having a surface excavation, or at least a collection of 1,700 acres of artifacts. Imagine how long it would take to do an excavation of that size, you know. And it's well documented, really well documented. Meticulously collected and recorded according to field sites between the years 1963 and 2010. Jerry, did you get to hunt it at Harness ever?
Yes. Yeah.
Jerry's hunted there, I've hunted there. Mark, did you get to hunt there? I lost you, Mark.
No,
But
we-
you're
we
around
asked
it.
him- We asked him what, somebody screwed it up, he was,
Yeah, but Bob, he limited who would have access to the site. Probably less than a dozen people ever hunted there with his knowledge.
Bob Converse hunted there quite a bit.
Right, yeah, he came down and visited Bob and took photographs of some of the collection, and used those photos in the Ohio Archaeologist. So, yeah.
Reed surface hunted too there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, yeah, he was there.
Gary,
Yes.
what does lithic distribution across the highest landscape?
Stone tools, basically, and also stone debris from making those tools. When Bob hunted the collection, and formed his collection there, something like 20,000 pieces of different artifacts were found there. And many of those were whole, something like maybe 4,000 entire, quote, arrowheads, and then tips and bases of the others. And then there were stone tools as well, the ground stone tools like what people call celts and axes and chisels and things like that. Yes?
So why hasn't it been geophysically surveyed? Is it a money issue, a manpower issue?
It's just its own private property, and if Bob were still alive, I'm sure we could have gotten it done.
Okay.
But the people that have taken over the farm since his death in 2008, so he's been gone that long. Yeah.
So site is on private property?
No, Harness.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so they're very private, and they're not encouraging anybody to come in and do any kind of archaeology or anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right.
Farmers have all kinds of concerns, you know,
Sure.
giving them the benefits of the doubt.
Gary, how long has it been mostly no-till?
It's probably been mostly no-till since about 2007 or so,
Okay.
yeah. I hunted there until 2012, 4 years after his death, but it got to the point where I could hunt for 6 hours and maybe find one entire piece of a tool, you know. If you're only turning up this much of the soil, you exhaust that after a couple of years when you're surface collecting it, so. But when I hunted with Bob, I probably found another 2,000 or so artifacts there too. Okay, so let's see. And again, like I said, it was meticulously collected and recorded according to the field sites that Bob established between years 1963 and 2010. So here's a 1934 Reeve aerial photo of the farm and the environment around it. Over here is the Scioto, kind of muddy looking there right now. This is a 900-foot sandstone ridge, heavily wooded. And then on the east side of the Scioto, everything inside the yellow dotted line. And I hope that Jeb, who has color blind issues, does that show up to you, Jeb, okay?
Yes, sir.
Good, all right. But that's the farm, and then I've highlighted exactly where the earthworks is as well. And then the green dot that you see in the big circle, that's the Edwin Harness Mound.
Where's Musgrove Road?
Oh, the road should be right here. Yep. And your wife grew up right in here somewhere, I believe.
Well, the railroad too.
Yeah, and this is the railroad.
So,
35 and the railroad, Musgrove Road, just for berries. Now, what did the glacier do? So this green line running right here is the high ground, it's the upper terrace. It's not perfectly flat. It varies maybe as much as 15 feet, but it rolls along there. And that is the remnant of the Wisconsin Glacier. There's probably at least 400 feet or more of sand and gravel that was deposited up at this point. And then when the Scioto River formed, through all the melting of the glacier and all the water being channeled, it has jumped its banks and cut into this. And like you were asking, Ron, it also carved up some little channels up in there, but those have to be really ancient, way before humans got there. So you see that upper terrace has a couple splits in it that's outlined in green there. That's about 620 feet elevation. And then there are some middle terraces, and these drop, and some of this one over here at the southeastern end, it kind of rolls down. But these drop down to about 595 feet, I would guess. 630 up at the top, 595 feet here, and there's a little corner up there where Rick Perry's house is today.
Gary, and say a really good flood, how much of that bottom floods? All the
Well,
way to the,
Since I've been hunting there, and I know Bob fought battles with this, there would be places through here, there, over here, and then on the upper farm, that would form sloughs that were 3 times the size of this building. And when they would dry out, there would be all these dead fish everywhere, carp this long, dead catfish and whatever, and the herons and the egrets, they were having a feast. Right? And so you can imagine in prehistoric times what a bounteous landscape this would have been. You've got rolling prairie up there. You've got all the wooded areas that you can find tree barks and nuts and various things in there. And then down in the bottoms you would have these sloughs that would have filled up, and they would have had cattails and other reeds growing in them, and turtles and frogs and beaver and muskrat. It would have been a very, very bounteous place, no doubt about it.
I have a question.
Yes.
Down towards the bottom, how far does that middle terrace go? Does it go to, it's totally outlined in green.
Yes.
Okay.
But that basically, here's the middle terrace, and then this is a bottoms terrace, which is still another 10 to 12 feet above the real bottoms itself.
Okay.
If that's making sense. It's a very complicated earthen landscape, and like I say, I spent 20-some years walking it, personally, row by row in the corn, hours and hours and hours, and got very familiar with it, and thought a lot about what it would have been like to live there.
Where does the terrace that you outlined originally end? Does it end in Ross County, or is it?
Yes, it ends
I
basically.
mean, this way.
This whole area tapers down. When you get to Walnut Creek, it's gone.
It's gone. Okay,
Yes.
that's what I
It's
wanted.
gone, yeah. Caldwell Cemetery levels out there, and that
Right.
whole area
I
there.
was just at Caldwell, looking back up the valley area, and so flat, and yet you can see something over when you're looking back up to the left.
For sure. And did you realize there's a mound
Yes.
there at Caldwell
Yes.
Cemetery? A lot of people don't know that, but there's one there. And then the bottom, I've outlined it in brown, the bottom land there, and you can see Dry Run and Walnut Creek's just a little beyond down here, another farmstead away. That's where the Carroll family farms right now. And it's 60 feet below the uppermost terrace, so it's 60 feet below the earthworks. And then this is what Bob did with it. Very first place he found an artifact was right here. So he called this farm field number 1. And every artifact he ever found there has the number 1 on it, even the broken ones. A lot of even the flint that was chipped away to make these tools have the number 1 on them. It was found there. Just meticulously recorded, that's what I'm saying. And some other, the Neff, I hope I'm not selling them short in any way, but I think there were marriages between the Neffs and the Harnesses, and so they acquired some of this land, and they still have some of this today. I hope I'm telling that correctly. I think that makes sense. But I have not interviewed them to come up with that. So as you can see, at least 45 different field sites that Bob identified over the years. And basically all of these field sites have been identified between the years 1963 and roughly 1978 or 79. And he'd never found an artifact growing up there on the farm until he talked to Albie McGraw, who was mentioned earlier. He said, Albie, why am I not finding any artifacts? And Albie said, you gotta wait till it rains the first time. After the clouds go in there, after it rains, and you'll start finding them. And boy, did Bob find them. All right. The harness artifact collection, if you study it, actually shows where the Hopewell were doing their thing on this landscape. And 31 of the 45 field sites have Hopewell artifacts in them. And that's all these different terrains. They're not just staying up on the top where they're building here. They're on every one of these different levels. Now, I've mapped this out for you. So here are some examples of some Hopewell corner notch points, and if you're not familiar with the point style, the Hopewell points, whether they're the Snyders, the low cluster points, which are a little later in the Hopewell time period, they all tend to have these notches in from the corners and usually a rounded base, but sometimes they are square. And but you have to realize this and this, they would have been really whopping blades that came clear out to here and had corner notches. And all of that has been resharpened away as they use these tools and tried to keep a sharp edge for cutting and piercing along the sides there. So hopefully you can see they all are various stages of the same point style. I hope that makes sense to you. Where were these found? Clear down here, almost next to the river, up on the high terrace there where E, A, and B are, a site called C+, up even within the earthworks. He found artifacts within the earthworks. In the middle bottom, and only on a couple sites down in the bottoms, especially C, which is a good one. Another style of Hopewell tool was a leaf-shaped blade. And these are some examples in the collection. You can see which field they came from. Like I said, he labeled everything, except this is one I found because I put an H on it there. So I used the same numbering system, but I used H1 and H15 or whatever. And here you can see how many of the fields this type of tool was found in. And I'm basically just doing this distribution from the points that I found and the points that I know Bob found. I didn't include this collection here, which I recently acquired from someone who hunted there in the 1970s, or a couple of other smaller collections that came from him. But I'm pretty sure it's pretty representative of the distribution along the landscape. The other type of Hopewell tool, the famous uniphase lamellar bladelets. And just to use your imagination, what are these compared to these? I brought some samples of bladelets, and what you have to realize is that flat on one side, there's no flaking at all, but they tend to have a little bit of a curve, so they're not a totally flat object. And what happens is they are struck off of these bigger chunks or cores, and when they strike this end down here, these are driven off, and you can see where these bladelets have all come from. And if you look at these, like number 14 plus, it has 1, 2, 3 facets on it. And those facets were left behind by the blade that was removed prior to that one being removed. And this is definitely a Hopewell landmark object. It's the key to easily finding a Hopewell site.
It's the what?
It's the key to finding Hopewell sites. If you're finding these, the Hopewell has been there, yes. Thank you. And here you can see the distribution of these as well, all over the landscape. We don't know everything they were used for, but they're definitely like a utility knife blade. They're sharp as a razor. And who knows how they were hafted, or if they were hafted, or whatever. Some of them are even modified on one end so that they can be used as a scraping tool as well as a cutting tool. And there are so many of them, I doubt that they could afford to do all the testing it would take to find out how they were all used. It would take years and years to come up with all the answers for that. And then I've labeled the cores. There are 3 of them in this photo. I did not bring any because they weren't found in the examples I wanted to show you tonight. And look where all those have been found. However, site number 6 in yellow, site number 25 in purple, and site number 18 in green probably were workshops for the manufacture not only of these bladelets, but for jobs they were doing there. In field number 25, for example, I know that I started hunting in the mid-'80s with Bob, and I would go into that field and I would find, in a 2-hour time, I would find 75 or 80 of these broken bladelets. And it had already been hunted for 20-some years by that time.
Amazing.
This fellow that I'll mention later on, that's what he found in 1977. Yeah, it's just an incredible amount of production of artifacts there. So the thought is those 3 sites may actually be some kind of special workshops. Oh, I should back this up. Let's see. And field 25, up in here, that's where Clarence Stouffer's house is. He was one of Bob's main men for running the farm. Hard-working man. So if we take a look at Squire and Davis's survey map, again made in 1846, we have to realize that although they were the first to map this out, there was another set of measurements and mapping made by James Milton and Gerard Folk in 1889. That's not as easily accessible as this, but it's out there if you ever want to find it. If you look at this earthworks, and if you were to stand here and walk on top of the embankment all the way around, it's easily 2 miles and maybe closer to 3 miles. That's how much earth was moved to make this. I think that at some points Bob thought that the walls were as high as 6 feet tall. So imagine using baskets to load them with dirt, 1 basket full at a time, hauling enough dirt to do 2.5 to 3 miles, 6 feet high, probably, what would you guess the base would be, Brett, if it's 6 feet high? 30 or 30?
Yeah.
Probably 30 feet wide. And then the task force it would have taken to keep that operation going, because you would have to make enough baskets to do this, so you're out there stripping bark off of trees and reeds in the swamps and whatever to make these baskets. And how long does a basket hold up when you're putting it through that kind of work? So there would have been a constant repair crew going on while this was all going on. And this would have just been a glorious thing to actually be able to observe how these people did their thing.
Are there burrow pits in there?
I think that Squire and Davis felt that this was a borrow pit, this, and then there and there. These are mounds over here, but not enough to actually account for that much dirt. And Brett can tell you, and I don't want to speak for him, but at Hopeton, there's evidence that the insides of the earthworks went down. How much would you say, Brett?
Probably 8 to 12 inches
Well,
of
scrape
topsoil
away.
over the whole
Yeah.
interior of the earthwork.
Were taken away to help build the walls there. But the thing that's incredible about Hopeton, as Brett will tell you, is that the square there was 12 feet tall. 100, at least, what, 100 feet wide?
50 feet broad at the base
Oh, okay.
and 12 feet tall.
Yeah. So again, these people were workers. This was important to them. And the arrows are pointing at some of the known mounds. There were at least 13 associated small mounds there. And 4 of those were called the Russell Brown mounds. He was a tenant farmer on the farm back in the 60s and 70s, I believe. And then there was one called the Ayrshire Mound. But I know that Mark Seaman did some work here, and he was not able to determine which were which for sure, because they'd already been excavated by the time he got there. And besides those 13 mounds, there was a great mound called the Edwin Harness Mound. It was 150 feet long, 90 feet wide, 20 feet tall at least, and it was archaeologically dated to between 265 and 395 AD, which is basically the golden age of the Hopewell, from about, it's right in the apex of the supreme great activity of the Hopewell people. This mound was explored at least 6 times. The first time, It was explored in 1846 by Squire and Davis. While they're out there measuring and mapping, they sunk a pit right in the middle of the mound and went down to the base, and they found stuff. Then, in 1884, about 40 years later, schoolmaster J.B. Wilson, whose house, or the school was located right in here. There was a one-room school there, and he and the boys at the school, after school, would go out and dig in the mound, and they found artifacts. And one of the harnesses, I think it was Dan Harness, actually approached him and says, "You can't keep doing this. I want all those artifacts," and he bought as many of them as he could just to get them back and keep them in the family. And then Putnam from the Peabody Museum in Massachusetts, he came in 1884 also, and he excavated there. And then Moorhead, the same guy that found, that worked on Mordecai Cloud Hopewell's farm and did the Hopewell Mound Group, he was there 5 years later working at Harness. And then Mills, he was there in 1905 and 1907, and at the same time, or in between times, he was working at site, and he said these two earthen complexes are sisters. He thought there were so many similarities in how they were set up. And then the last person to work there, and after her, it was basically totally leveled. That was Nomi Grieber, and she worked there in 1976 and 77. And I had the pleasure of driving over here to visit my wife, who lived in Chillicothe, and I was living in Jackson County. And I saw something going on over there, pulled in, went in, introduced myself. Nomi took me around, showed me everything, introduced me to Wes Clark, her big master, and the whole thing. So that's what I'm saying. The archaeologists have bent over backwards, to make you aware of what treasures you've got here in this area.
Those are two of the nicest ones.
For sure.
Wes Clark, as in Marietta now, and working
Yes.
at ODOT?
Yes.
I knew Wesley.
Yeah. And I've actually transcribed Mills's diary of his excavations at the Harness Earthworks, and I gave a copy to Brett and Tim. And there was somebody else transcribed it earlier, and they actually missed some things. Being a school teacher, I was used to reading just about any kind of handwriting, and I was able to figure out words that I could not. But every time he came here, he called where they were staying, Camp Harness. And that's Camp Harness. They had tents. This is what it was like in 1905 to do an archaeological excavation. This isn't just a sun shelter. This is where you're spending the night. Can you imagine nights like we've had this summer? It would have been terrible. So who are some of these people? That's William C. Mills, who lived from 1860 to 1928. And the gentleman in the middle is labeled as Uncle Bob, and I actually brought the actual photograph that they came from, and it's labeled on the back who everyone is, but he's labeled Uncle John, and he's John Harness. And then this is Aunt Lee, who is his wife, and she was Virginia Lee Cunningham, and then various children amongst those. And then the 1976 and 1977 salvage excavations, the reason it's salvage is Bob wanted that mound gone. He was a farmer, and he had shares in the farm amongst family members, and they wanted it to be producing. And so he said, we've got to do something with this mound. There's just this residue of it, and there were all these big rocks that he couldn't understand, and every time they plowed there, it did damage. And so Nomi Grieber was pulled in on this, and she began her excavations there, and I think I'm correct in saying this was her maiden project. So here she was, tackling the Edwin Harness Mound with all of this history and going in there as her first major archaeological experience. And she did quite the job. Here you can see, after a rain, all of the squares had to be emptied out, and Nomi always wore this crazy floppy hat. There were different versions of it, pink and flowered and whatever. And here's Bob standing next to her. Anybody that knows Bob know why he had the oar in his hand?
Up the creek without a paddle.
Yes,
Well, that's it.
he was on the county commissioners, and he supervised one of the dumps where junk was thrown away, and he saw this paddle there one day, and he had a gun rack in the back of his Chevy pickup truck, and he always had that instead of a gun there, he always had this paddle in case he ever found himself up a creek without a paddle.
I remember following him. I mean, I lived on that road for years, and I would see him there. I go, Dad, why does he have that on there? And he told me the same thing.
So here's what Nomi did. So I told you, 150 feet long. That is the outline, where you see the white dots there. That's where the harness mound was. And every one of those dots is some kind of a post mold. And if you're not an archaeologist, a post mold is basically the residue and a mold of something where a post would have stood. And look how many posts they found here. A lot of these were hickory, if I remember from Mills's account. And hickory's not an easy wood to be chopping around without steel axes.
Hickory's one that actually decays really fast.
Yeah. Well,
Go figure.
but maybe they didn't feel like it needed to be there long, because after they built each of those sections and filled them, they basically dismantled them and covered them over with soil, and then put a super mound over everything. So, but it's got several rooms to it, and who knows was there a circular wing up at the other end? You can see some traces of some posts, but they didn't find anything to where they could substantiate for sure that that's what's going on. And then you've got some other activities over here, and it's probably even evidence of screens that were in between where the various platforms for the burials were set up.
Gary, I need to correct that. When it's outside and getting weather on it, it doesn't last long, but if it had been protected from the elements, it would.
Okay. Well, again, though, I doubt that they needed it longer than a couple of years. And I know that when we talk about the houses, you probably wouldn't want to have lived in a wooden house that was thatched and this and that for longer than a couple of years, just because of the bugginess and the smoke-filled, stained stench that would have packed those places. So I doubt that they wanted to live in anything longer than 15 years. Good insight.
So what were the big rocks that Bob kept hitting? Were they part of the?
Well, I should have said that. So all around, what Nomi found was surrounding this oval shape of this mound was a cap, a base cap of stone that went all the way around it, and it went several feet up from ground level up the side of the mound. And unfortunately, none of those capstones have survived. There was one in the barn on the harness farm back when Bob was still alive, but since he's gone, that barn is gone, and I don't know what happened to that stone, but it was a beautiful stone about this long, this thick, and this wide. It was almost looked like it was crafted, but it was natural. So there's the outline of the inner structures. And we have 20 slides to go, but these are going to go fast, so hopefully you can hang in there on it. We're going to focus on some interesting and unique discoveries, and these are just surface find discoveries on the harness farm that give us some tantalizing glimpses into these people that built this earthwork system here. So first of all, something that Bob called the Burlington Church cache. And you can see a little circle there, white in the middle and black in outline. And the reason I did that is because the Burlington Church cache, which I wanted you to come up and see before, and you can still come up afterwards, is black on the outside and white on the inside. How do you have chert or flint that is like an Oreo cookie? And the reason is it was burned. So it was a pinkish white flint originally, and it was so heavily burned. Some of this is as black as Upper Mercer flint, and others is kind of grayish, and you'll see patches of that original white. You can also, if you come up later on, you'll see, in this case, some more of it. Here's Bob's explanation of what he found, but there's actually fire popping. You can see where the flint popped out when they were burning it. Why do you burn flint? You know, we'll see what we can figure out here. So, what is this Burlington cache? And look, Bob numbered every one of those. He actually joined probably 30 pieces. And that was nothing. It got him nowhere. If you guys want, we'll have a party and then we'll sit around and we'll drink some coffee and drink some cocoa and see if we can put these together. I would love to do that, I'll tell you. But wait till you see what we're up against. So Bob started finding these scattered pieces of burned and broken flint on January the 30th, 1964. That's about a year after he started hunting. And it was up there inside the great circle of the earthworks in field 14. So what's he do? He knew some archaeologists. There was this famous archaeologist named Olaf Prüfer who was just starting his career here in the States. And he knew that archaeologists get some trowels out and they set up squares. And so he set up a 40-foot square area and they dug it and they sifted everything and they found a pit below the plow zone. But it was only 14 inches across and 12 inches deep. Of course, they were already down about this far by that time. So maybe it was more like 15 or 16 inches deep, at least. And all they found in it was dark colored soil and bits of charcoal. There wasn't one piece of flint in this pit. They did find some pieces of mica, and if you're not familiar with it, it's this layered stone that it comes in books basically because you have all these pages that are as sheets of paper. And Hopewell loved to carve images in that. So they found some pieces of mica, but really no artifacts in there. It's a real mystery, but wait till you see how much more mysterious it can get. So here are some examples. That's what it probably looked like originally before it was fired. So why would you take Burlington Church, which comes from Illinois to Missouri, basically, and make artifacts out of it to burn them? It gets more complicated. And they weren't all the same type of artifacts. Those are the tips of those Hopewell corner notch points that I showed you pictures of. And there you can almost see a complete point if you add my little dotted line about it. That's what it would have looked like. But fragments of cache were found in 27 other fields. And he was able to match pieces he found in 14 with pieces from field 1, for example. 14's up here, field 1's down here, 3 football fields away. What in the heck is going on here? And look how many pieces he found. 2,429 pieces. And I used to have permission to surface collect the fields to the north and the south of Bob's, and I found pieces on those farms as well. Because the Hopewell knew no farm boundaries. You know, there were no boundaries in those days. So how did these things get spread across this terrain like that? And there's where the Burlington Church came from. Ross County in the square area there is where the harness farm is. So it was originally quarried 400 miles to the west, and it seems to have been napped elsewhere because there are no flint chips of the Burlington Church to be found in any of the hundreds of thousands of flint chips that Bob collected.
Gary,
Yeah.
have you ever been to Chillicothe in Illinois?
Yes, I've been to Hopewell.
There's several references to trade with Chillicothe within that museum.
Yeah,
So that's probably where that tie-in is, yeah.
it could be. And here's the other thing. When I went there, I asked them what the people that were leading the tour knew about ties with Chillicothe, and they didn't. They'd never heard of Chillicothe.
It's listed on the wall,
I
Chillicothe,
know.
Hopewell.
I know. They walked by it every day, and they didn't see it, or else they didn't catch the significance. But they were volunteers, so that's okay. So these bifaces were made someplace else. They were brought here, where they were burned and then broken, because there's no evidence of the inner core being burned ever. So they were burned before they were broken, and then they were deposited loosely in some kind of a cache. And the farthest pieces that I have found evidence of so far are 1 3/4 mile away. So was it so sacred that they were taking it back to one of their homesteads? Or, I don't know. I know that when it came to obsidian out at the Hopewell Mound group, they actually found deposits of the flakes that were used to make the obsidian blades. That was so precious and so sacred that they even buried the flakes that they made the tools from. removed to make the tools. So, make sure you check out the Burlington stuff. Another big deal is 3 Hopewell houses have been located in Field T in the bottoms. And Jared Burke, using his magnetometer, was able to find those. And he was working with Paul Pacheco and Deanne Weimer. Paul Pacheco's at SUNY at Geneseo, New York, and Deanne's at Bloomsburg University at that time. And they brought field schools here for several summers, and they worked down in the bottoms. And the interesting thing is these houses are almost 1.25 miles to the northwest of the earthworks. And that's the closest trace of any houses have been found to any earthworks that are, at least here in Ross County. There are buildings, but they're not known houses. And there's this model that Hopewell archaeologists came up with several years ago. They call it the dispersed Hopewell hamlet habitation model. So it's not like you've got villages, even small villages. You've got possibly as much as 2 or 3 little homesteads together, and then a couple miles away, another grouping like that, probably family-oriented or related. But who knows? We can only speculate. But there's no evidence of any kind of villages going on. So where did the manpower come from to do the earthworks and to maintain the baskets and sharpen the hoes and everything that they needed to keep going? This place was probably a destination place for you to do sacred work. Who knows? Based on some of the artifacts coming from as far away as Alabama and the Carolinas and all the way up to Lake Superior, people knew about these Hopewell people. Maybe they considered themselves a loose grouping within them, or at least had ties with them, and possibly this place was so sacred, so important, that they were coming here to just help out. That's Gary's opinion. So here's where the Brown's Bottom is, and there's field number T, and you can see up there where the earthworks are and the Edwin Harness Mound. And here, with Paul Pacheco's permission, I have an aerial photograph of the first house that they excavated. And it was called BB number 1 for Brown's Bottom, and like I said, Russell Brown was a tenant farmer, and it always irked Bob Harness because he wanted it to be named the Harness Bottoms or something like that, because he's so proud of that Harness connection here, and yet this guy that was only temporarily working there, he has the bottoms named for him in the archaeological reports. Did I skip something? Let me make sure. No, okay, we're good. They also found 3 earth ovens and a dog barrel. And that's the dog skeleton there. So the Hopewell did have dogs. And if you notice, the dog is fully articulated, so he wasn't dimmer. Since he was found in an earth oven, I just want to clarify there. And then the other 2 houses were named Ladies Run number 1 and Ladies Run number 2 for Mr. Harness's dog, Lady. She's the one in black. That's Gary back there, so don't confuse us. And here's the house number 1 that came from Ladies Run. And each one of these white discs is a covering there to mark the post holes. And there's some kind of a central post as well. And I've seen a couple of different models. I'm going to put Brett on the spot. What's your idea of what this might have looked like based on what you see here? Did it have a conical roof possibly?
I think it had bent pole roof, just because that is the dominant form in all of eastern North America.
Okay.
But these were among the biggest structures ever built in eastern North America. That thing's like 30 feet across, something like 1,000 square foot under roof, as big as my house.
These are impressive. And again,
With multiple, those black things are hearths.
yeah.
So there were probably as many as 4 families living under one roof, maybe 30 people living in a single structure. So, relatively few structures, like 2 or 3 per site, but that might account for 100 people.
And I know that the farm just to the south, I definitely found scatterings of bladelets and cores. So I wouldn't doubt that there were some houses down that way as well. But again, no magnetometry work has been done on those farms either, so. Although no other Hopewell structures have been detected, typical occupational materials such as Hopewell pottery, the bladelets, and a large number of low cluster points. And the low cluster points are the smaller version of those corner notch points, and they come in basically about 300 AD or so. But lots of those have been found on field number A, which is about as far away as you can get from the earthworks and still be on the harness farm up there to the north. It's an upper terrace site. It's 1.4 miles northwest of the Liberty Earthworks, and it may be a clue to a possible other middle woodland habitation site. And Jared Burke thought it could even be a large site based on the lithic scatters there. So there you see field A where all of that material was found. And then the last neat thing that came off of the farm as a surface find was found in the mid-1970s by a soil consultant named Ken Mitchell, who lived in MacArthur at the time. And he, being a soil consultant, he was coming to visit all the different farmers, and he would see Bob out there at the end of the day in his bib overalls walking the rows, and he got to know Bob, and he and Bob walked together. And these are some of the artifacts that he collected, and he was so impacted by Bob, as I was. In there was this. And this was an eye-popping thing to me because I have found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shards of prehistoric pottery in the county here, but I never found anything that looks like what's in that yellow box right there on the screen. Made a trip out here to Mound City to see Tim and Brett and show this pottery to them. And Brett right away said that it was kind of special. You want to say anything about it?
Well, yeah, it's simple stamped pottery. It's not cord marked like the local tradition of cord marking. That simple stamp stuff comes from the southeast. It comes from like the Tennessee River Valley, the Cumberland River Valley, northwest Georgia, in that area. And it's really, really rare in Ohio, but there are several vessels from Mound City, from the Turner Group, from Harness, from Sipe. These big famous centers have these vessels. Often they have feet on them too, four little feet, tetrapodal vessels. These are most likely brought here by pilgrims from the southeast, and they're bringing, it's probably not the vessels that they're bringing, it's probably something in them precious, some sort of gift that they're bringing.
And Ken found them, and they were in several cigar boxes, and when I saw that, I knew it was something special. And as Brett said, it's there are only three other sites here in Ross County where this kind of pottery is known. And then Gerald Anderson was telling me that his twin brother, Gerald,
Yeah, I found Swift Creek pottery in northwest Illinois. And the Badger dug it out, and we're still trying to find the rest of it, but it's tetrapodal, which is unusual for Illinois. But it's at Swift Creek. Very unique design. So this is from Brighton, maybe even northern Florida, down in Georgia, in that area. Very unusual.
so think of it, it didn't come up the Mississippi. This was land travel up into the Ohio Valley and up into Illinois. They did not have the horse either. So.
It's interesting on all that Burlington church. I'm from Illinois. My twin brother's out there, northwest Illinois. We both are big in archaeology. But you see, like the Tremper pipes are all from Illinois pipestones. And there was that big spear in the Ross County Museum, I think it's Burlington Church from probably Illinois or Missouri. But you don't see any Flint flint out there. I don't know, Brett, have you heard of any? I've hunted a lot of Hopewell sites, and it's all Burlington Church, bladelets, and cores, but you see very little. I think they did find some Flint Ridge bladelets in the Napoleon Hollow mound with the baby burial in the pot, possibly. You can't look at them anymore because they're burials, so they don't let you do research on them.
It's really hard to explain. You don't, and another interesting thing, I don't know of any Burlington bladelets or cores, but we do have Burlington Churchill up here. I know there is nothing like that that I've detected in Harn's collection, and there are thousands of broken bladelets in that collection to go through. So to give you a little wrap up here, so the Burlington chert is the white arrow and the white dashed oval there, and the Swift Creek pottery probably came from somewhere in the brown dashed oval down there in northern Florida, Georgia, Alabama, up into Tennessee. So, we definitely haven't exhausted the Hopewell. There are many more topics that we could talk about sometime. What kind of sight lines are associated with Liberty Earthworks? What in the heck are these cache barrels and mounds all about? There are mounds that are not burial mounds that have nothing but artifacts cached in them. What was it like to be a dog in the Hopewell culture? How do we define agriculture amongst the Hopewell? Is it gardening to a higher degree than our gardens, or terrain and forest management, all of that, what that would imply? What do archaeologists mean by the term Hopewell? It's not a tribe. It's a culture, it's their technology, their house building, their mound building and all of that. What kind of relationships are there between the Adena and the Hopewell peoples? And how on earth did they maintain these earthworks once they built them, or did they? You know, again, a lot to talk about. Any questions from you?
What did they use the galena for? I know that's lead ore, but.
Yes, well, if you know what a bar amulet is, it's possibly a weight for an atlatl. There, I've seen one made out of galena. It didn't come from the Harns farm, but it was found in Ross County. And it has holes drilled in it. So, but as you said, it's galena is lead. And that comes from basically Iowa and that area in there. Any other?
What was the name of the town in Illinois that has similar, or has a sister relationship with, or should have, and they never Chillicothe? Is it someplace to visit is what I'm asking, and what's the name of the town?
In northwest Illinois, the Albany Mounds Group.
Tell me again.
Albany Mounds, it's up across from Clinton, Iowa, it's along the Mississippi River. But it was a major Hopewell site. And some of the burials actually were, they traced back there from Ohio. They could do strontium analysis, and some of the people in Ohio, the big mounds were from there. So you see a lot of, intermarrying or something, movement of all these people between these big centers. But the big main Hopewell sites are the Albany Mounds, Twin Hopewell, along the Mississippi and southern Illinois, and then the Band site, southern Indiana, were just tremendous sites. And they have been adequately explored. You did a lot of work at Man, I think. But it's a fabulous site.
So, not to keep anybody past their bedtime, but I thank you for your attention and your great questions.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, well done.
And if you fell asleep, I'll be giving the same talk to the Six Rivers chapter in October.